welcome back to the Boundary Corner podcast, along with my partners Brian Siegler and Jonathan Talley. I am Curtis Wilson, and this episode is brought to you by Dr. Lord Jeremy Counts at Main Street Pharmacy in Blacksburg. If you love this podcast, the Hokies, the town of Blacksburg, make sure you are supporting Main Street Pharmacy when you make your way to town.
Whether you need prescriptions, a tube of toothpaste, or just want to stop and say hello, let Jeremy and his team take care of you. The money you spend at Main Street Pharmacy goes towards the things you support. So next time you're in Blacksburg, head on down to Main Street Pharmacy at 301 South Main Street. Fellas, it's been a little bit of a while, but a lot of stuff has happened. How we feeling tonight?
Feeling good, man. Feeling good. Got a new job, getting off earlier. Kids and wife got me doing more stuff around the house.
There you go.
Still feeling good, man.
Putting you to work. You got the honeydew list growing.
Feeling good, man. I love it.
First of all, huge congrats to that on Tally, man. You've been telling us so long about looking for something that fits like your life with your sons and your kids. And when you told us about this, man, you told us like some of the benefits. It's great because, we all know how it is, man. And it's lovely that you have that opportunity. It's also lovely for us because we're going to be able to talk more. More stuff with the podcast, more eyes on things. And man, tonight, our people, thank you, Jerry, for that. But tonight, y'all, it's going to be a lot of fun, right? We've had this man on multiple times. And for the last 11 days, David Cunningham has been living out of a suitcase between Seattle, back to Dulles, and then instead of driving back to Blacksburg, he stays in Dulles and flies back to Dallas. Bring him on because the first question I have for David as you pull him on here, when did you actually get back to Blacksburg? Because you told us you left the Thursday before the Sweet 16. When did you actually get back in Blacksburg this week?
First of all, I appreciate you guys having me on. I got back Sunday at 4 o'clock. So I was gone for 10, 11, 12 days. So, I mean, hey, man, that's they went to the Final Four. It was a treat to cover the Sweet 16 and the Elite Eight in Seattle, and then to get to cover Virginia Tech in the Final Four in Dallas. That was really, really special. And they played good basketball. They played good basketball when they played in the Blacksburg sub-regional when they were a 1 seed. So they played good basketball all year, 31-5, went to the Final Four for the first time in program history. Nothing to be ashamed of at all. I would say probably the second greatest Virginia Tech sports season ever. So pretty impressive all around, and it was a treat to be part of it. Just so happened that it took a whole lot of travel on my part, but we made it work.
Coast to coast Cunningham. Yeah. So let's talk about it first. Let's talk about the Sweet 16 up in Seattle, man. And it was three formidable foes there. Tennessee, who the program had seen earlier, beat in Knoxville, and across it was either going to be Ohio State with that unbelievable press and defense they have, or the juggernaut that always is UConn. So just take about those first couple games, the attendance with the fans, and just the way the team played in those two games. How impressed were you to see they hadn't been there before, and it didn't look like that?
Yeah, well, I think one of the big things is first of all, you mentioned the fans. I thought it was a good showing from a lot of Virginia Tech fans. I was talking to some people, including Grayson Wimbish, who you guys know. He flew up from LA. He flew up to Seattle to come watch Virginia Tech play. There was a good crowd from Virginia Tech fans, but there was also a good crowd just from everybody else in Seattle, the locals. It's a great women's sports city. Obviously, they had the Seattle Storm there. It's a great local sports city, period, but they especially love their women's sports, with Sue Bird, who was in attendance. And I thought it was really cool. I mean, there was essentially a sold-out arena for every single game that was played there, except for the Tech game on Monday night against Ohio State. And that was a little bit tough because Monday night, all the people that were covering Virginia, or I guess all the people that were covering Iowa and Louisville and everybody on the other side of the regional, along with UConn and Tennessee, had already left. There were only two teams there. So, but it was really cool atmosphere. The arena's phenomenal. As far as the games are concerned, Virginia Tech had never been on that stage before, but they never, thought twice about it. The moment was never too big for them. They played really well against Tennessee. I think in both games against Tennessee, against Ohio State, there were moments where things could have gone south, and they buckled down and kind of stuck together, and that's what they've done all season. And they fought through it. And against Tennessee, that was when the Volunteers cut it to 1 late in the second half, and they kind of turned things around and scored a couple of big baskets, locked down on defense, and rode out the win. First Elite Eight appearance in program history. Then they played press happy Ohio State and pretty much completely dominated that game. Ohio State led for some moments here or there, but it never felt like Virginia Tech wasn't in control of either game, really. Maybe a little bit when Tennessee had some momentum, but you win 2 games and get to the Final Four, so special. And again, it was a really cool moment. A lot of the families were there for the Virginia Tech players, and that was cool. There were a ton of Tech fans there. Just to see that happen, they played really good basketball, and I don't think they never doubted their ability to get there. So many other people did, and I think that kind of made it even more special. The fact that they were the 1 seed, they always knew they had the ability to get there, and some people looked at them and said, they're not historically a women's basketball school, and they just said we don't care, and they went on to the Final Four, and I think that was a pretty unique part of it.
Yeah, the moment never seemed too big for them. It definitely seemed like they were playing for each other and kind of playing within the framework that Kenny Brooks had laid out for each opponent there. And I think the fact that the moment never got too big for them is that they stuck together and kind of trusted that process definitely helped them out. And it's incredible when you look at how the matchups played out there. You had Tennessee, which a lot of history. And then you're looking at, either Ohio State, they've got some horses. Then you also have, UConn on that side of the bracket with their history. And it's incredible the eyes that got put on Virginia Tech women's basketball that haven't really been there before.
Have y'all seen the rating, what Monday night did? With that was a late game slot, 2.78 million. That's insane. That's higher than some of the football games this year. And I know the product, we'll get to that later, and the product and everything. And then, we talk about down Friday night. I mean, I sat and watched it here. I'm here in the man cave. We've got the big TV, and the kids want to watch a movie, and that's fine. I got watching the game. The rating was almost 4 million people. Like Brian said, it's eyes, right? How do you keep bringing more people to the program? How do you keep bringing more money? Go to the national championship in wrestling. Go to the Final Four in basketball. And Friday night, against LSU, I mean, it hurt. I think anybody that's a fan of the team know it hurt. But watching that game, I mean, the physicality at which LSU played, in which the refs let them play, and I will say let them, because there were quite a few, in my opinion, maybe I'm Homer, there were quite a few times where it was legitimate fouls that weren't called. And I think Tally, Brian, y'all both can say it, and David as well. Everybody's played. If you're playing a physical team and they're not getting called fouls, it's immediately in their favor of however the game flow goes. Even if, yes, we did have a lead going to the fourth. But
I'll throw this in there real quick. Thinking about some of the AFC championship games of yesteryear, where the Colts are playing the Patriots and they're just letting them corners mug the receivers. And it kind of reminded me of that, because the Colts in that time frame were very much a finesse type offense, and the Patriots were very much we're going to get in your face, we're going to push you around, we're going to, whatever the refs will let us get away with, we're going to do. And it kind of felt like that type of mirror there, looking at the physicality that LSU brought to the table. And I mean, no fault to them. I mean, if they're going to let you play that way and you've got the ability to, go for it.
Yeah, man. I mean, besides everything that we're talking about, we got to give a shout out to Kenny Brooks and the girls, man. Because all of us are on Twitter. We see the hashtags and the memes and all types of stuff. Conference Kenny, and it seems like through the whole season, everybody was waiting on them to falter or waiting on them to make a mistake, and they didn't. They the whole season they were a solid basketball team, a really good basketball team. To go and win the conference, to go and get a number 1 seed, to get to the Final Four. It's just like David said, the moment was never too big. And when you get into a game like that, I'm kind of on the other side of it. I love to see, if I'm gonna watch women's sports, man, like women's basketball, I love to see them, let them be physical. You know what I'm saying? Because they're athletes. You know, people think, oh, it's a woman, they're not supposed to do this or not supposed to react this way. We've seen all the hoopla in the news. Like, just let them. They're athletes. When we're watching them play, let them play. If a man did it, you wouldn't have nothing to say about it. Just let them play. You know. So if that's what we're doing, let them play. So I think, again, the moment wasn't too big. Virginia Tech was definitely right where they needed to be. We let one slip away, in my opinion, but no fault to the coaching staff and the girls, man. They played young ladies. They played a great game, a great tournament, and I was proud to watch them play.
David, let me ask you this. This was your first Final Four coverage. Give me the feel, because that arena looked jam-packed. It looked loud, not only from the LSU side, but from the Tech side as well. What was it like? You're there I'm assuming courtside. Okay, courtside. I know sometimes they stick y'all up in awkward spots.
No,
I
was
like this.
Yeah, no, I was courtside. It was cool. I mean, there were a lot of Iowa and South Carolina fans there too. It's just a cool environment, man. You mentioned the just the eyeballs. I mean, there were almost 10 million people that watched the championship game between LSU and Iowa. That's how you continue to grow the game. You know, even when for those people who don't like Angel Reese FaceTiming Lil Wayne after LSU wins, stuff like that is how you grow the game, right? Cam Chancellor and Brandon Flowers showing up to watch Virginia Tech play.
Yes.
That's how you continue to grow the game. And yeah, I thought the arena was the arena in Dallas is really, really cool. Mavericks and Stars Arena, really, really great crowd. And again, Virginia Tech was 10 minutes away from getting the national championship game. And I think it got to a point where LSU was just better. But you know, I think you mentioned it, Tally, multiple times this year in the past where I don't think Kenny Brooks and the team would have gotten to that next step, and they never really wavered. They never really blinked. You know, so many people were like, "Oh, Virginia Tech's gonna lose here. Okay, Virginia Tech's gonna lose here." Well, they went out and won the ACC championship. Then they were number 1 seed. They won 15 straight games, and then played the team that ended up winning the national championship. So there's only so much you can do there, and they played some really good basketball along the way. They were fun to watch, and you know, now you recruit, you know, obviously Elizabeth Kitley and Georgia Amore and Kayla King are all coming back. That's 2 All-Americans, 3 starters to a team that just went to the Final Four. That's a solid core to recruit to, and you're recruiting, you know, you're pitching them on, hey, we just went to a Final Four. You know, who wants to go try to win an ACC championship again? And you know, we have the Final Four experience, and you know, again, really historical year. Honestly, kind of amazing. I don't know if it's really set in for a lot of people just how amazing that season was. It's just hard to get to the Sweet 16, let alone the Final Four. And you know, the Hokies beat some really, really good teams to get there, and they've accomplished a lot of really cool things along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, the news of King and Kitley and Amore and Georgia having one more season, it's you go out there and you've got that core, and what are we looking for? I mean, I know we're a finesse team, David, but is it looking for a couple physical bodies that, you know, next year you play LSU, is you've got the 2 shooters, you've got your inside present. Is it looking for someone who can be a little more physical? Do you think that's what Kenny's going to go with, or do you think he's going to try to find what's been working to get him to 31-5 this year, which is just, you know, tell us all, if we're winning 28 plus games the next 5 years, women's basketball will start paying for itself.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think, you know, Kenny's done a good job. I mean, first of all, I don't know if you guys know this, but they've got 4 top 100 recruits coming in. Ooh. They've got a really talented recruiting class coming in. But Kenny's done a good job with the portal in the past anyway. Kaylana Traylor and Taylor Sold, 2 players who had big roles for Tech this year, came in the transfer portal this year and last year. Deasia Gregg, who was Tech's essentially 6th starter, you know, she came in. She went the JUCO route after transferring from Georgia Tech. But Kenny Brooks has always found success in the transfer portal. I'm not worried. I think the biggest thing was when you looked at Kenny Brooks and his tenure at Virginia Tech from a 1,000-foot perspective, if you want to say, I think the biggest thing was always, can the product on the floor be better? you knew he was going to get talent in. He's always had really good talent, even in his first couple of years when Tech wasn't making the NCAA tournament. He's had good talented teams. Now the good talented teams are coinciding with wins. So they're putting out wins on the court. They're getting to that next level. You got to go. You got to keep going, doing what works, man. I mean, again, they were 10 minutes from a national championship, right? Like, and you can talk about them handling physicality, but they handled Tennessee's and they handled it. They handled Duke's. They handled multiple other teams throughout the season. They were 31-5, and I think LSU was kind of just a team of destiny a little bit, right? LSU hadn't hit any 3-point shots really all tournament, and then come out and shoot the lights out on Sunday in the championship game, right? That's just the kind of way basketball works. So they're going to stick their guns, and I'm sure they'll pick up some really good additions, as Kenny and his staff have done in years previous. But I mean, they're in a really good spot, man. You're recruiting to a team that just went to the Final Four. Nobody else in Blacksburg can say that. Nobody else in the ACC, or very few teams in the ACC, can say that. So you got a leg up on everybody, and they were already really good in terms of recruiting the portal and mining the portal and finding really good players that fit their system. I think they'll continue to do so.
Yeah, pretty easy sell to say, hey, we just went to a Final Four. Come join us. Let's see if we can run it back.
There we go.
Definitely.
Let's talk about men's hoops a little bit as we kind of move forward here into the next topic. We'll lead a little bit here with the Mike Jones departure. How is that going to hurt Virginia Tech as we kind of move into further into the off season? And is there any sort of rumor about who that next guy up is going to be to kind of fill that role?
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting. So for those of you who didn't see, Mike Jones accepted a job at Maryland. He was at the Matha for 19 years. That's kind of his home. That's his background. That's his backyard. I'm not surprised at all. I think everybody involved with Virginia Tech, around the program, everybody kind of knew Mike Jones was going to move on eventually. Where and when just kind of had to be figured out. I'm surprised that he didn't stay longer, but when a spot comes open at the school, at the school you're used to being around. Again, he was at the Matha in Maryland, right there next to College Park. I'm not surprised at all. Somebody told me the other day they called it a waste of time, and I don't know if it was necessarily a waste of time. Now, what I will say is this: Darren Buchanan, one of his two big recruits he got in, already entered the transfer portal. He was the Washington, D.C. Metro Player of the Year last year. Obviously, everybody knows Rodney Rice. Yeah. From what I've heard, Rodney Rice has kind of told Mike Young and the staff that he's planning on staying. But if Rodney was to leave, okay, well, then those are the two main guys Mike Jones brought into the program. I think at that point you kind of look at it and throw your hands up and go, there was no net gain, there was no net loss. Kind of just was a little bit of waste of time, but nothing happened. But Mike Jones was a great guy, and I think there's probably some things that go on behind the scenes, some player development stuff that we don't necessarily know about. But I'm happy for him, and I think this hire is going to be really interesting. I'm not sure who Mike Young's going to go after. I've seen some names thrown around on message boards and on Twitter and stuff. I'm not sure if there's anybody specific. But I do think it's interesting that, you've got Kevin Giltner, you've got Christian Webster, two guys who have, you've been very familiar with for 4 or 5 years now. Kevin Giltner for longer. Can you get somebody that brings something different to the equation? I think that's kind of the interesting piece. Chester Frazier was the guy who was here before Mike Jones, and I thought he did a really good job of providing a very good defensive aspect. I'm curious to see if Mike Young could get somebody that can kind of bring a different perspective, kind of like Frazier did to this team. But you also got to bring in somebody that's a really good recruiter. I don't know how much it will, this move really affects the roster and really affects what Virginia Tech was going to do over the summer. AJ Swinton is a 2024 kid who had connection to Mike Jones. He had played at the Math in the past, and I think we're still too far out for him to figure out whether or not he's coming or not. And again, a high school recruit not coming after a coaching change is not surprising to anybody. So,
Yeah.
but I think Tech's still in a good spot. Now I'm curious to see where Mike Young goes from here, and how he if he can kind of get somebody that kind of bolsters the staff in a different way, fills maybe a hole or two that Tech didn't necessarily have covered previously, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense because, like you said, Buchanan and Rice, and if you only lose one of the two, it's a net gain. And I like what you said, David. It's a net neutral. Maybe it's a waste of time, but anytime you get someone from that program to come, at least it shows. And this is just me. Maybe it's me being half full. I'm an optimist. It shows that Mike Young's going to be able to get guys that can recruit down to Blacksburg and help them out. Because if you pull Mike Jones from there, when you know that there have been probably other programs to offer him, it shows you he probably can land a suitable replacement for him. Now, I'm going to flip it over here. Since all this has been going on, there's been 2 transfer portal guys, which I assume probably already knew Mike Jones was going to be out before they even came to Tech. First, Mekhi Long, the ODU transfer last year, averaging roughly 10 points a game, 8 rebounds, long, lanky defender. Seems like that was something I know we on this podcast mentioned a couple times that might have been missing from the team this year. Originally, was a Virginia kid, top 10 recruit back in, 2019 out of Massanutten. David, just if you've got a chance to look, anything on Long that you like so far?
I like his ability to rebound. I think that's big. I mean, look,
It's true.
He led the he led Conference USA, I believe, in double doubles this year. I mean, he's a good prospect. I'm curious to see. And again, we can spend time talking about him and Tyler Nickel, obviously the other transfer, North Carolina transfer. I think a lot of Virginia Tech's success hinges on whether Grant Bazillion and Hunter Couture come back. I'll just put that out there. And I think everybody understands that. But I think Long is a solid addition. He gets to the rim. He gets fouled. He shoots a lot of free throws. I think he'll be a solid addition in terms of he can kind of help stretch the floor and drive it. And he's a good defender who can rebound. I think he can kind of do it all. Maybe a little bit more accustomed to playing on the outside than Justin Mutz was. But I think he's a solid addition.
They're going to kind of fill in that role for. Oh, go ahead, Tally. I'll let you.
No. I was just going to say, kind of what Cunningham was saying. Getting to the goal and shooting free throws. Like watching Virginia Tech a lot of times for me, it's just you just want somebody to just have a little oomph, Love Justin Mutz and what he brings to the table, but he just, for a big man, first of all, he's not really a big man. Being 6'7", 6'8", it's tough to go up against them trees and just not getting to the free throw line enough, man. And that's what we're missing. We're playing games and people get physical with us because we are such a finesse team, and you got Bazilli shooting threes, which he's great at doing, but you got to have somebody that does the dirty work. You got to have somebody that's in there getting rebounds and can hit those free throws for you, not just getting rebounds and looking the outlet to go back up with them. So, I think that's a good pickup, and I think we need, a couple of more, 3-and-D defenders as well. That's why I guess Couture is a big thing, whether he's coming back or not, because of course he can shoot. Everybody knows that, but I don't think people give him enough credit for his defense. When he went down, the defensive aspect of the team was much different. So, similar to what David is saying, man, just this hire, I hope that he brings somebody in, because I've been I don't want to say critical, but I've just been skeptical because I like to argue with people just about basketball. But, I hope he brings something in, just that defensive aspect, to just ramp it up a little bit. So I got off course a little bit, but when he said that kind of touched a little bit of what I was thinking.
Yeah, and I mean, I know Tyler Nickel can do a little bit of that. What do you like about Tyler Nickel, David?
It's tough because he's so young, right? I mean, he's, he only played as a freshman, kind of a similar situation to John Camden, although he played a little bit more. I think he's kind of a more advanced John Camden. I think he's a guy who can stretch the floor a little bit. He can shoot the three ball. He's a solid rebounder. He's a good scorer. My biggest thing is, can he play defense? And I think so far, he showed a little bit at Carolina that he could play solid defense. I think he's going to be a good role player. I wouldn't expect him to come in and start, but I think he's going to be a big help. I think Tech's, I don't want to say problem, but I think the question you run into it if you're Virginia Tech is, if Hunter Couture doesn't come back, you don't have many guys with experience. And Mekhi Long has experience, but you'd essentially be playing Sean Padula. You hope Rodney Rice. You're playing MJ Collins or Tyler Nickel. You're probably playing Mekhi Long. And if you don't get Grant Basile back, you're playing Lynn Kidd, right? So I think a lot of it hinges on whether Couture or Basile come back, but I think there's a lot of positives. I think this is a group that could have been better defensively a lot last year. And I think Long and Nickel are two solid defensive pieces. Scoring the ball is not really ever going to be the issue for Virginia Tech. Mike Young is, it's not like Tech's going to always be great offensively, but Tech is good, usually better than most. I'm curious to see how those guys gel defensively, because I think Tech needs a better paint presence. And I think if Lynn Kidd continues to take steps, that'll be good. But I think there are a lot of just questions I have about Tech's ability to play defense and guard some of the more athletic teams in the ACC, like a Miami, for example. But I think, Tally, you mentioned that Hunter Couture's defense is probably the biggest reason why he's so effective. His defense was really good. Mutt's played good defense for the most part. So I'm curious to see if a guy like Sean Padula can take that next step defensively. I'm curious if Nickel and Collins and Rice, Long can all slot in, and this can be a better defensive team for Virginia Tech, because I think there were times last year where the offense was flowing, and then on the defensive end, there was kind of just a lull, and they couldn't get any stops. I think we saw it a little bit towards the end of the year. So I'm curious, but I think Tech's in a good spot. I think a lot of it, again, hinges on Basile and Couture and whether or not they come back.
Yeah, kind of my big observation was always looking at the defense. How can that get better? And then looking offensively, how can we get guys that can generate some offense when those shots aren't always falling, right? We had some of those spells where the shots weren't falling. How can we still generate offense during those periods, so you don't let the teams go on some of those longer runs that we saw to kind of claw back in a game that we thought we had in hand a little bit there?
It's to what Shelton said about a month ago on this program, when he talked about there are times in Mike's offense that ball gets stuck. When we see the ball getting stuck right is when we see the other team have big runs. I think what we all thought with Rodney Rice was he's the guy that can break that mold. Rodney Rice has the capability, and we saw his tape. Why was he rated so high? He has that ability to take it off the dribble, right? He's athletic. He's a really good guard. Nickel's similar to that. You look where Nickel was ranked. He was a top 100 player. He was pretty much borderline 4-star everywhere. Top 3 player in the state of Virginia. Now, does he have that type of game? No, but usually when you see guys rated that high, there's a few more elements to their game than just shooting or just, being a good rebounder. So I think the 2 pickups are good, but David, you made the perfect point. It's Hunter and Grant. If Hunter and Grant come back with the additions they've made, the team better be better. Better be better, or Tally will start. What do you say? Tally going to take him behind the shed next year.
Criticize.
All right. Let's flip it off and let's get to some football. We're not even to the spring practice yet, because between the last time we came, we got commits. We got commits all over the place. And woohoo! The first one we got, our first commit for the 2024 cycle, David Belfort, out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, Western High School. If you don't know, Dad's Vitor Belfort. Dad was a stud in the UFC back in the early 2000s, and still a stud now, knocking people out in some sort of boxing. I saw that pop up the other day on my Twitter feed. His pop's knocking somebody out. 3-star, pretty good offer list here. Brian, I'll flip to you on Davy. I know you had a chance just to look at the highlights. Smaller guy, 5'10", 185. What do you like about him? And what do you hope we're right about?
I mean, pretty polished quarterback kind of out the gate. I think that's the big thing that you see with him. The question is going to be frame wise, size wise, can he hold up in an offense that's going to have a little bit of that RPO, a little bit of run action for the quarterback, and the ability to throw in the run and things like that. But everything I'm seeing right now, I mean, he's got the ability to get that done. I like the ad. We can have a debate about whether we should be taking another quarterback that is about 10, 15 minutes down the road from me as well in this class, and if we can push hard enough to get both of them. But I like this as a kickstart to the 2024 class.
Yeah, I like it. I mean, definitely was happy that we finally got started. I kind of look at him. I don't know. I looked a little bit of film. He kind of reminds me of a more polished Burmeister, just with the athletic ability that he has. Not, didn't look scared, on film. Of course, taking some hits, still delivering the ball, able to move a little bit. So, I mean, if you're gonna start off with a quarterback, I don't see a problem with it. Now, I will say, since you brought it up, I won't go too deep into it because we're talking about people we do have, but there's been so many arguments about why aren't we looking at this quarterback, or why aren't we looking at this quarterback, or why aren't we doing this? I'm a Virginia Tech fan and have been for a long time. I don't think it's in Virginia Tech's best interest to wait on anybody to commit. If you can get somebody, you need to get them, because we've been burned so many times thinking, oh, we have this person or this person's a solid commit, and then they go elsewhere. So if these quarterbacks that's right down the road or whatever the case may be coming, I still want them, but I don't think you can. We're not in position to wait. Like, we got to get, if we got talent that's wanting to come, we got to let the talent come in. That's just my opinion.
What's your thoughts on Davy?
Honestly, I've been so busy. Him and Dandy, the other commit, I've been so busy covering women's basketball and doing all the spring football stuff. I honestly haven't had a chance to dive that deep into him. But I do think he's a good commit. He had a lot of good offers. Honestly, there's plenty of quarterback controversy on this current team to worry about. So I mean, we're being completely honest.
We'll get into that. Like, we're getting to that.
We'll be there.
But I mean, if we're being completely honest, he joins a loaded quarterback room. Like, and by loaded, I mean there are a lot of bodies. Somebody's going to be the odd man out. And,
yes,
right.
But I think it is a good pickup on the recruiting trail. I think he's a guy who, could turn out really, really well at Virginia Tech.
Absolutely. You just mentioned the next guy I want to hit on, which is Derek Dandy out of Mount Airy, North Carolina. Top 25 player in the state of North Carolina. We had already mentioned him back a few weeks ago with Matei. And Tally, 6'4", 215 pounds. Tally's been saying it. We getting bigger. We getting bigger. We keep getting bigger. Only a few offers here, but also Mount Airy is a smaller school. You're talking about on the western side of the state. But, we talked, Brian, me and you were talking to Robbie about him just a few weeks ago, and he says he reminded him of House Gaines. And I know House's career at Tech didn't, flourish like we all hoped it would, and hope he's doing okay now. I hadn't seen him on the timeline in a while. But coming out, House Gaines had a lot of offers, a lot of interest. Brian, did you get a chance?
Popped quick.
He did pop quick.
So.
What do you
looking at it, he's got a good frame. I'd like to obviously see him put on a little bit more weight, before he's ready for prime time. But, I like having a guy 6'4" frame, plays a little bit bigger than his weight, just looking at the tape. So that's a good sign. Like most high school edge rushers, he doesn't quite bend the way you want him to yet, but that's something that's very coachable. So I like the pickup, and I think it's something that you can kind of build off of. Definitely kind of an under the radar type talent, similar to we saw, a couple guys that were in the previous class as well.
I agree. I'm all right with it. I ain't watch a whole bunch of tape on him. I just seen the size, and I'm like, no 5'11s. No 5'11 defensive ends. I'm all right with it. Let's go.
That's the best part about Tally on that. And you know the funny part, y'all, is if y'all who were here a few weeks ago watching with Matei, and I know David, you have some relationships with Matei there. Matei, we talked about Florida. Check. Made me happy because I'm worried about, like, listen, Florida's a talent-rich state. Go get somebody down there. We did that. Matei said, watch North Carolina this year. Second commits from North Carolina. Mm-hmm. And then Matei was talking about how we sit better with a lot of the top recruits in Virginia. And sure as hell, right out the gate, we get our highest recruited, 247 player from Virginia since this coaching staff took over full cycle. Josh Clark, up out of Alexandria, the 13th ranked player in the state. That's automatically up 4 from Caleb Woodson, who was 17 last year. 6'1", 170 pounds. Recruited by Derek Jones and Pearson Prelude. I wonder where he's going to play, y'all.
Yeah. Well, if you watch his tape, you'll be able to see it too. I mean, first couple of plays on his tape, man, he's a fluent runner. He's picking balls off. He's taking them to the house. Good vision once he gets the ball, once he picks the ball off. I mean, of course, high school is much different than college, but that's why you go recruit. You recruit for the athletic ability, and that's where you get them in there and coach them up. So as far as size goes, I think he's already 6'1", 170. Easily put a little weight on in the college ranks. And like I said, just watching the first couple of clips on his tape, man, I was impressed. He's great with the ball in his hands once he gets it. So I think it's a good pickup, really good pickup. I was impressed with that pickup, even more so than the Davi pickup. I was impressed with the Clark pickup.
Yeah, and I think he's probably going to be one of those guys that's position fluid his first year on campus. Probably throw him out there at corner, see what he can do. Probably going to end up as a safety, kind of a fluid, rangy safety that can be a ball hawk. But I like the pickup, big time pickup for the Hokies, in my opinion.
David, we know you've been traveling. Anything on him? Anything you heard?
Yeah, but I tell you what, Virginia Tech continues to pick up big kids in the Commonwealth. I think that's the big thing, right? Brent Price made an emphasis, and Derek Jones and Pearson Prelude are solid recruiters. I think this is a pretty solid recruiting staff. I think they've continued to put good pieces together. I don't think the questions are really in the recruiting part anymore. I think the questions are on the football field. I think that's bottom line. But I do think Clark is a big pickup. Tech is continuing to make up ground and make progress in terms of picking up higher rated kids in the Commonwealth. Did well in Richmond, especially in last year's class. Can you continue to make progress? And if you do, and you go out and put out a good product on Saturdays, you'll be all right. But I think the product on Saturdays part, I'm sure, which we're going to talk about in a sec, I think that's where it all comes down, because if you're not winning football games, it doesn't really matter how well you're recruiting.
Yeah, and to piggyback off what DC is saying also, kind of goes back to the basketball situation as well, because you got Tyler Nickel that is a Virginia kid, and he is, was the best player in Virginia when he graduated.
He's the VHSL's all-time leading scorer.
Yeah, you're gonna, same as like Mac McClung, right? So Virginia people, they pay attention to each other, which most people do. My son plays travel baseball. He's in 7th grade. We hear about a kid that made the 9th grade team. He's playing right over at our high school. We go watch him play. We don't know him. We just go watch him play. He's a 7th grader that's already throwing 85. Yeah, let's go watch this kid play to see. Okay. He's pitching on the 9th grade team. So I say that to say, when you get a Tyler Nickel to come in, and then you start producing with somebody like that, or you get one of these kids from Virginia, just pick one from last year.
Yeah.
Braylon Johnson, Caleb Woodson. One of these kids goes out and makes a name for himself. A lot of times, again, these kids are the best kid that the people around them have seen. But traditionally, in the past 5 years, we haven't had big name Virginia kids doing much. You got
Settlement.
Tremaine Edmonds that just signed a killer contract, but I mean that was a while ago. We need to see somebody at Virginia Tech that produces and gets these other recruits excited. Man,
1,000%.
I just played against him. I just played against him last year,
Mm-hmm.
and he's already there doing this. That's what's going to take the staff and the school to the next level. It's
1,000%.
not. I keep telling people it's not. It is recruiting. It is the staff, but the staff's doing everything they can do. In my opinion, they're going to the places. They're out in the highways and hedges. It comes down to somebody producing on the field, and it's their job to put them in that position. So we got to go out and make something happen. It's on the field this year.
DC, you said it just a few minutes ago. This is a good recruiting staff. And Tally, to your point, it's been 5 years. Tim Settle and the Edmonds brothers were the last time it was Virginia products who went drafted high, and now they've been in the league over a half decade. That whole
wow.
group.
That's
but
crazy.
To your point, on the field is where it's got to happen. We can recruit great all day, but then they got to start winning. And I love what they did with bringing in Brent Davis. I mean, David, you saw him out there a little bit earlier before anybody knew. Offensive line coach, was at Army, always a big rushing attack. Have you had any interactions with him or just seeing him on the field? I mean, I'm assuming him and, he's out there, because you're just bringing in a brand new offensive line coach that's going to be full-time on staff just to help him move along. But what's just your thoughts on Brent Davis out the gate?
Well, I tell you what, he sure works a lot with the offensive line. He's trying to fix this rushing attack, which, there was so much talk last year about, okay, they wanted to do this thing in the games. They wanted to be this type of team, but they didn't really have the personnel to do it. And there were these injuries and blah, blah, blah. Now they're trying to reconfigure it. I think they've got the personnel to be a type of a better rushing team this year. I think having Brent Davis coming in helps you be more creative and more clever incorporating different type of rushing style, I think, into your attack. He's looked pretty good. I mean, obviously we won't know much until they actually take the field, but I do think it's a big addition, and for anybody who was questioning whether or not what Tech was trying to do, well, they hire Brent Davis and they're like, we're trying to figure out a rushing game, and we're hiring him to come help us figure it out and clean everything up. And I think a lot of that has to do with what happens up front. But I think Crook and Brooks, which I know you guys have, as topics later, I think, those three additions, Davis helping out those two guys, I think if they all gel properly and can get the personnel to gel properly, we'll see some success in the running game.
Yeah, and it's really hard to do a whole lot without a good running game. And we talked about it, last year, and I know we're switching schemes, but even in, if we go heavier RPO this year than we saw last year, you're still going to need to establish a good running game for that to have any sort of success, because the threat of the rush has to be there for everything else to work. So getting that figured out is definitely point number one for us having success on the offense this year, because we actually do have the skill players outside this year to make defenses pay, but it's only going to work if we can rush the ball at least effectively, if not very well.
All right.
I agree.
All right. Well, we got here. It took us 45 minutes. Hey, David, we messaged you, 2 months ago? We're going to talk spring ball, David. I'm sure David was sitting here like, oh, yeah, just like last year, 70, 80 minutes. No, we're 45 minutes in, and we're just getting the spring ball. But I don't think we trade the world for it, because I think what happens with the ladies, having all these recruits come in, it's wonderful. But let's hit it up. We're going to start with one subject before we go to break, and it's the quarterback room. Brian, you have a question that you want to ask Mr. Cunningham?
Yeah, so, we got this big transfer portal ad with Kyron Jones coming in, kind of a 2-horse race in the off season, with Grant Wells there. What have you seen? What have you heard thus far as to the competition? And will this be something that we think kind of carries into the fall?
Yes, it is going to carry into the fall. This is going to be I know quarterback decisions are usually made probably later unless you've got an incumbent. this is going to be one that drags on. And it's not because either guys are not talented, but it's because Tech's still trying to figure out how the offense gels together. Tech, still trying to put pieces together, right? Grant Wells has experience. Kyron Jones does not. That does not mean Kyron Jones is not talented. But right now, he's still trying to figure things out. He has not had any time in this offense before this. Grant Wells had all last year to learn the offense, and he played in it, right? Whether or not he played well, good or bad, he played in the offense. That's more experience than Drones has. This is I think it's pretty even right now. I would say Wells probably has a little bit of an edge simply because he's got more experience and because he's been in that situation before and because he knows what exactly the coaches are expecting of him. But I don't think that counts Drones out at all. And I think to Drones, I think it'd be unfair to say Drones is like even with Wells simply because he does not have that experience, right? This is his first semester on campus as a college student. He's got so many other things he's dealing with. He's learning the offense. He's learning his teammates. I mean, again, remember, like, I know a lot of the receivers are kind of new faces, but he's never thrown passes that any of these guys. Wells was throwing passes to a handful. I think the competition will really heat up over the summer and once we get into July and August. And I think it's going to be legit. I think it's going to be a 2-horse race, and I think it's way too early to tell. But I think they both have their skill sets, and I think a lot of Brent Davis coming and the new offensive line. I think all the pieces around them are improving. Right? People can look at Wells last year and say Wells was not a good quarterback. Well, Virginia Tech was not a good offense. Right?
Oh, no.
There was no offensive line. Keyshawn King, Malachi Thomas was okay when he was healthy, but he was barely healthy, right? Yep. The tight end room was okay, but the only wide receiver who could get separation was Caleb Smith.
Yeah.
That's not a lot to work with, right? I think if the other pieces continue to improve, Grant Wells or Kyron Drones, whoever is the starting quarterback, is going to be in a better position, right? And I think this is a good opportunity for Tyler Bowen to experiment a little bit and figure out what works and what doesn't. So it's going to be something that progresses on through August.
There you go.
I got a lot to say. We got to go to break.
No.
No break. Oh, okay.
You ain't breaking yet. I'll break us. You go on with what you got to say in your question there.
No. First of all,
you made him so damn happy with that statement, David.
No, man, it's been so many people. Y'all don't understand. I've been fighting. It's been a gauntlet, man. I've been fighting people. I think I got into it with one of Grant Wells' his uncles or something on Twitter. I don't know. He was on my head. He was, "Oh, you hate him. You got an agenda against him." And I'm like, I just said he wasn't good last year. That's it. I understand that the offense was not good.
I objectively, I don't think he was very good.
That's all I said. That's all I said.
Objectively, that offense was one of the worst in like Power 5 history in the last 20 years. Like that offense was atrocious.
Yeah, I agree.
It wasn't just Wells, right?
I agree.
It was all over the damn place.
So for me, and this is kind of going to lead into the next point as well. When you do have what we had, which was a shit show last year, a quarterback that can make plays with his legs as well as his arm. They keep talking about triple threat. I've never seen a quarterback make a play with his head for real. It's either his hands or his arm. I mean, his legs or his arm. But I get what they're saying. I feel like if we had somebody in place that could do that, and I'm not saying it's Drones. I'm just saying I feel like if we had somebody that could do that, we wouldn't have lost a couple of games. Not because the team was so good or the team was so bad. I just think we just didn't make one or two plays that we could have made at that position to propel us to a win. And again, takes us to our next point, because I'm a big Drones guy, just watching what he is and how he plays. You've seen him a little bit more than we have. What have you seen anything from him in practice that just kind of made you go like, damn, we didn't have that last year?
Well, I think his athleticism. I think that's important, right? Not that Wells is not athletic, but I think Wells. I think Drones is a guy who's built more for that. The exact reason why you hire Brent Davis as an offensive consultant, because you want to run the football and use the quarterback. I think that could be, if it does end up being Drones, I think that's something he could provide, right? He can provide a little bit more of that quarterback running game. I think his athleticism is something that stands out to me that doesn't necessarily, I think some of the younger guys, both Taj Bullock and Devin Farrell are also athletic. Pop Watson, I haven't really seen much of him. I think some of those younger guys are also athletic, but they don't necessarily have the composure and the poise that Drones does, right? Or that Wells does. So I think his athleticism, if anything, is going to make him stand out. But I also think we'll see more. We'll see more of that as he gets more integrated into the offense, and as it becomes less of, hey, let's learn the techniques and fundamentals of how we want to do things, and more of, hey, let's, once we get to the fall, right, it's going to be, okay, who's the better quarterback? Now it's more of, do you understand what we are trying to systematically install? Do you understand what we are trying to run? But I think his athleticism could potentially provide a different dynamic for Virginia Tech this year.
Yeah, just looking at him, athleticism combined with a little more physicality than Wells would bring to the table, right? Because he's not just athletic, but he's athletic and strong. And I think those two combine well to, if you want to use your quarterback as a rushing option and implement, again, more RPO where you can have that quarterback as a legit rushing threat on every play. And that's going to put that defense in a lot more conflict.
It's going to put them in the binds. It's going to put them having to make decisions every single time he sticks it in Tootin's or Thomas's gut. If you crash and he pulls, you're giving up a big-ass play. We saw that. We saw that in some of the tape with West Virginia and some of his high school film. He's athletic. By the way, David, Thomas Train agrees with you here. He probably doesn't know everybody's name yet. That's fully aboard with that.
Yeah, that's a big thing, right? You got to remember, and it's not just him. It's all the young guys. I know we're going to get down and talk to wide receivers later. Or I guess not the young guys necessarily, but the new guys, right? We're going to get down and talk to wide receivers later. Like Ollie Jennings and Daquan Felton and Jalen Lane. I assume they know the quarterback's name by now, but getting into a rhythm probably takes a little bit of time.
Absolutely.
Learning what they want to do. So I'm curious. Everybody's going to have their eyes on Drones come the fall. I'm really curious to see what the biggest changes are in his development over the summer, right? In terms of his work ethic and how he gets into the gym and stays working on his craft, because I think he's got a real legit chance if he continues to work at it. Wells just kind of has a little bit of experience on it.
It's true. So we'll see that as time progresses. We'll see it as Brian said a few weeks ago. The real competition starts at the spring game. It's not right now. Now let me ask this, because you mentioned a little bit earlier all the younger guys, and there are a boatload of them here because I'm staring at 4 as I look at the roster. Do you feel like before the end of spring or after spring, we're going to see position changes or potentially portal from any of those guys?
Attrition's got to come from somewhere. Virginia Tech's at 90 scholarships right now. You've got to be down to 85. Attrition's going to come from somewhere. And you don't need 6 quarterbacks on the roster. That's just plain and simple. I hate to point name names, but I think a lot of it, I wouldn't expect Grant Wells or Kyron Drones to transfer out, and I wouldn't expect Pop Watson or Dylan Whitkey, the two other newcomers, to transfer out. I think it comes down to the 2 guys in the middle, and that's Devin Farrell and Taj Bullock. And I think at this point, a lot of it is, can you play a different position, right? What is your position versatility? And some of those guys might have position versatility. The other thing is, those guys want to play too. It's not like quarterback's one position, I think, one of a few positions where it's like, if you're not playing, you don't get experience, right?
Yeah.
Or if you're not the starter, I should say. If you are if you're the third string or fourth string cornerback, you're still going to get a lot of reps, right? Yeah. If you're the third string quarterback, you're not touching the field. So I think it comes down to kind of what those guys want to do, what they mentally, how are they, do they enjoy being at Virginia Tech? Do they want to go somewhere where the grass might be greener, where they can probably play a little bit more? I think that comes down to it, but I think I would expect to see a little bit of attrition, not just in that room, but in a lot of the rooms where you're way over the limit or probably where you would like to be, simply because you're trying to rebuild this roster. It's all understandable right now.
Good deal, man. And yeah, it's got to be attrition somewhere. I know we'll talk about attrition in another room in a little bit of time here, but we are 57 minutes in. We need to pay some bills before we go to even more spring practice takes from David Cunningham from Tech Sideline. We are going to take a quick pause for a message from our digital partners.
As we take a quick break, we'd like to tell you about getting your free website report from our digital partner, Grassroots Digital Marketing Studio. They'll tell you how your website ranks on Google, on-site SEO, and social media. No commitment to buy anything. You can get your free report by visiting grassrootsdigitalstudio.com/free-website-report. Now back to the episode.
All right. We got an interesting question in the chat here from Jerry. And I'm going to just throw it in before we get into the offensive line, because this is an offensive line podcast. And it says, speaking of coaching, are BT fans okay with a toxic coach or a wholesome coach? Referring back to my Twitter question today. I didn't see the Twitter question, so I can't comment too much. David's laughing. Brian's smirking. Tally's looking down trying to find a tweet.
I'm trying to find the tweet. I want to know what the tweet was.
Brian, you clearly know about this.
I think the idea being, if you're winning, does it matter?
No. Fuck no.
Not really.
If you're getting to where it needs to be,
don't matter.
Does that matter?
Winning cures everything.
Winning cures everything. The old staff, David, you're getting so much more access to practice now. But if Virginia Tech had gone 10, 11, 9, 10, 11 during that tenure, you wouldn't care. A, you're an alum. B, you're a writer, because it's a hell of a lot more fun to write about a team that's winning than a team that's losing. We're fans. Oh, he doesn't open practice. I don't care. We won 11 games last year. You actually give a shit about that?
Yeah. If you're winning cures all sins, man. If you're winning, nobody cares. But, it's always good to be, a little bit. People want coaches to be, especially Virginia Tech fans, they want coaches to be Frank Beamer.
Yes,
you are never going to get a Frank Beamer again. You're never going to get somebody like that. Again, I love Dwight. I love those guys when they come on and talk about that culture and stuff, but nobody is going to empower and embody what Frank was in that area again. Even if you're doing the best you can and you're doing a good job, he was just different. That's why he's a legend. So, wholesome, just touching on that question, it's great to have a wholesome coach like that, but Frank got it done on the field as well. So you just can't, you got to win.
Ladies and gentlemen, our wonderful
that's your sponsor, folks.
That's our title sponsor. I need a puppy before every game to win. Jeremy, we love you so much. Keep it up.
Jeremy is crazy. Jeremy, I better meet you at the spring game. I'm coming to see you at the spring game.
Go to the pharmacy.
And we ain't eating no puppies either.
He gonna make you take Jameson shots though.
This time.
No, sir. I'm not drinking nothing with him. He's a licensed pharmacist and all of that. No, thank you. Don't tell us what's to do.
Let's flip it, y'all. Let's talk about the O-line. Again, after quarterback, this is an offensive line podcast. And David, how's Coach Crook been able to hit the ground this spring so far? What's his on-field demeanor like, and what have you seen from practice about him?
Yeah, I think he's fitting right in. He's a guy that's got West Virginia roots, D3 roots, kind of the same roots that Brent Pry has. Those East Stroudsburg, PA roots, sort of that same conference, that same division. Again, some of those West Virginia schools, the tiny schools, and he's fitting right in. Again, we talk about people who are still trying to learn other people's names my guess is he's still trying to learn his personnel because he's barely been on the job. But I do think he's somebody in the past who's done more with less. And from everything I've noticed so far, he's done a really good job in terms of fitting in. I thought it was evident when Tyler Bowen, I believe, or maybe it was Stu Holt, mentioned that he and Elijah Brooks had come in immediately, and they'd barely been in the same coaching circles as some of those guys before. And everybody just came in and got to work on their first day, and they basically spent an entire day together in the office, and everybody was gelling together, and it was fine. It was like they had known each other for a while. So it sounds like Crook and Brooks are both fitting in really nicely.
I love hearing that. And we had talked about Crook last time we were on here. Talked about how we liked the fit, how we liked that he seems like a guy that he has the embodiment of what an offensive line coach, when you think of an offensive line coach. So
yes, he does.
The fact that he's got in there, hit the ground running, I like that. Let's pivot to more of a depth chart here for what it's worth at this point from the offensive line standpoint. I was very adamant that when you look at the center position, that was the one I was most worried about. I know we had some depth concerns at tackle, but when I was looking at center, I was like, all right, that's going to be problematic heading into the season. Obviously, Caden Moore sliding over has helped alleviate some of that. But who are the guys that are getting the majority of reps there at center? And give me at least two, maybe three.
Yeah, Caden Moore's the guy at center. Jack Hollyfield is the guy right behind him. I think that's it, to put it plain and simple. And I think Moore's taking that position pretty well. That was something Joe Rudolph had suggested to him before he left. From everything I can tell, Brent Pry and I wasn't there when Ron Crook spoke to the media, but it sounds like everybody finds that to be a natural fit for Caden. So him and Hollyfield are the two guys there right now.
All right, well, that makes me feel good because we know Jack was brought in to be the center, and we had a conversation with Caden a few months ago, and we didn't know, I didn't know, Tally didn't know, Brian didn't know, but when he told us like that, oh yeah, I've been snapping to learn how to play center. Like what? Like you've been like a really good right guard since Jump Street, and I know Brian, you've been mentioning it too. Like you know what, he is a really good right guard, and if he can get the snap down and get the calls out. You're talking about taking a guy who could play at an all-conference level guard and put him there to run your offense and somebody you trust and know.
And it also gets more of the guy. You actually have more depth on that in that guard slot, so it gives you a little bit more flexibility of how you're going to mix and match the rest of the line to get that best five out there. When I say best five, not necessarily best five players, but the five players that play the best together. It gives you a lot more flexibility there. And let's talk about that a little. Where are some of the other tightest position battles taking place across the line? Is it kind of that tackle spot? Is it at that right guard spot? What are we looking at so far as terms of tight battles for the starters?
Yeah, I think Bob Schick, Jesse Hansen there at right guard is probably the one big interesting thing to me. I think the other thing is it's a little bit too early to tell, right? It'd be one thing if it was an offensive line coach that had been here for a while.
True.
Ron Crook's still trying to figure out who all works together. Again, he's probably still trying to figure out guys' names, right? Remember the guys' names. I think Hansen and Schick at right guard is what I would keep an eye on and to see how that plays out. But I also think it's interesting. Like this is the first semester for a lot of some of these young early enrollees. We've been seeing a lot of Lath Ganem, guys like that. Once they start to get more reps under their belt, how do they kind of fit in? I think we'll know more. We'll get to see a little bit more maybe in the spring game. And then, once fall camp rolls around, we'll get to see a whole lot more as far as that is concerned. But right now, it's just tough. There's not a lot of – they're rotating a lot of the different guys, right? It's not necessarily the same lineup all the time. They're moving guys around and trying different things. So it's kind of tough to answer. But I do think that a couple weeks ago, Hansen was kind of the guy at right guard. Now Schick's playing a little bit more there with the starters. I'm curious to see how that plays out.
Yeah, and I guess kind of rolling into the next point that we have, when you talk about a lot of the rotating that they're doing, and you're seeing, we know that group is young as far as the offensive line goes, but are we seeing, or are you seeing some more reliability in the numbers? Maybe, hey, if this guy goes down, the guy behind him is ready to go a little bit more than we've seen last year.
Yeah, I think so. I think, a guy like Brody Meadows, for example, that's just one example. I think he's got a little bit, he's got more experience under his belt. I think the depth is there a little bit more. I'm curious to see what happens once the guys have a summer and to kind of figure out what Crook wants to do. As maybe he wants to do something completely different than what Joe Rudolph, right? Curious to see how that kind of looks, but I do feel a little bit more comfortable with the offensive line depth. I think there's more talent there, to be honest. I think they've kind of bolstered that a little bit. There's a lot of young, raw talent. That's the thing, and how quickly those guys can develop, I'm not sure, but I feel a little bit better about the talent. I think something else to note is for some of these guys, this is their third offensive line coach in 3 years.
Yep.
So that's a whole lot of change. Curious to see if at all, that affects anybody. But yes, to answer your question, I feel better about it. I'm curious to see if those young guys can continue to develop over the next couple months to where we get to the fall where when we talk to Ron Crook again, Ron Crook's sitting there going, yeah, I like how this guy's improved and come along. And I thought he got a better grasp of stuff as the spring ended, stuff like that. I think right now Crook is kind of just messing around and trying to figure out, who's comfortable where.
Yeah. And he said that when he was interviewed after practice one day, and I know you were out, but you guys have added Andy Bitter. First of all, love that you guys have added Andy. Love it. But he talked about, he's like, it's finding who gels. It wasn't just saying, I'm trying to find the best 5 offensive linemen. For Brian, who played it, and Tally, who played right on the outside, he said that magic word. I'm looking for the 5 that gel. Who when I put together, it flows. The push, the punch to the right, and he's right on the next level. When you hear Ron Crook say that, it was like, okay, he's going to be mixing it up. But, most O-line coaches will do that. Now, you mentioned the youth. Well, you got to think. You mentioned Brody Meadows. Brody Meadows has only been here 1 year.
Right.
You've got like Lance Williams and Chaplin and Hunter McLean. So many guys coming in. They're babies, basically.
Yeah, and Meadows was working a lot at guard last year, and now he's working mostly at tackle, it seems. So that's a little switch that I think, could be an answer to some of our tackle depth concerns that we were feeling like coming into the spring practice so far. So.
And you want to know what? I'll say this aloud, David. You can agree or disagree with me. I don't think we're going to be worried about guys portaling out of the offensive line room. Oh, yeah, man, I installed it. Oh, whoa.
Whoa.
No, I don't think so, but you also got to, I would say now, no. I think this is kind of a breath of fresh air with the new offensive line coach, right? Yeah. Now nobody's going to be portaling out, but there are, depending on what happens after next season. I think that, I guess you meant like right now.
Like right now.
Right now, I would not expect anything simply because
next year.
Yeah. Well, and again, so for a lot of the guys, it'd be year 2 in the program, right? Their second different offensive line coach. And if some of them still are not playing, they're going to want to go somewhere and play naturally. Right now, no. And I think this is a good opportunity for Crook to kind of refigure things and figure out, okay, maybe Joe Rudolph had this guy playing at this position, but he's more comfortable here, right? Brian and Tally, you guys have played the position. You know how interchangeable some of that stuff can be at times. So I'm curious to see how Crook kind of figures things out and messes with it and tries to come up with the best possible combination.
Yeah, I mean, there were times like where we would have different offensive line rotations depending on the type of opponent we were playing. So I mean, it's definitely a fluid situation, especially this point in the offseason where Crook is still trying to figure out what he has, and guys are, other than a couple entrenched starters, are still fairly green heading into this year, even though some of them have experience. So outside of Moore and Clements, there's not a ton of full season experience that are coming in here. So it's going to be interesting to see, how the line gels, and if there's any more shuffling, both at the veteran position and some of the young guys that are kind of fitting into to where we can have that eight-man rotation that you can kind of feel comfortable with.
Definitely. We've talked about a little bit about the offensive line and fluid situations, which kind of takes us to, some other fluid situations, which is the running back room. I mean, we've had a lot of running backs come through here and had a lot of running backs in that room. One of my guys, Alabama boy Kenji, transferred out. He's no longer with the team. Well, I ain't gonna say transferred out. He's no longer with the team. Don't know where he's going or if he's transferred yet. But he's no longer with the team. You've been watching them a little bit. Has there been any of those younger guys that has kind of impressed you from watching spring practice so far?
Well, I tell you what, I think Bryce Duke and Chance Black are both. I think they're both coming along strong. I think that whole room is coming along better. I'm curious to see what happens when we get into a game situation. But from what I can tell in practice, that whole room's coming along. I think the overall competition in that room is better. And guess what? Brian mentioned Jeremiah Coney by name. Obviously, he's an early enrollee kid. I wouldn't expect him to contribute right now, but I think overall the talent in that room is better. And I think a lot of the young guys. I think Coney has some. I think Coney has some promise. I think Duke and Chance Black kind of be solid options. I think it all still runs through Tootin and Thomas. I think that's probably the logical guess. But I do think there's a bit more depth there in the younger part of that room, and I think there are a lot of guys that kind of might take advantage of that opportunity should it come their way.
Definitely. Like you said, kind of Tootin and Thomas is what most people's thinking, and kind of knowing and looking at. Thomas is a much different. When he's in the game, we're a much different team. No matter how bad or good we were, or how bad or good the line was, he runs different. He's not very big, but when he's in the game, he runs different. But if you're in that room, you got to understand. I mean, he has been injured a lot. He hadn't been on the field a lot. So a lot of those young guys have to be taking, those reps thinking I could be next man up at any time. They're going maybe 1 and 2, but it's the game of football. Somebody can twist their ankle and I need to go in and get a couple of reps. And all it takes is one play to solidify yourself as getting some playing time. So I'm just hoping that, where we are, we're a 3-8 team last year. These guys are looking at it saying, hey, I gotta go hard every rep to earn my playing time because it's there.
Yeah, and I feel like we got a pretty decent 4-man group now with Tootin coming in, and obviously Bryce Duke had some burn last year. We saw Chance Black get some burn last year, so we got guys that have shown some flashes here or there. Obviously behind Tootin and Thomas, but again, Thomas staying healthy is going to be important. Just from a depth perspective, because I think you got tools that Black and Bryce Duke bring to the table that are a little bit more change of pace compared to what those two can do. But yes, speaking of Thomas, I mean, he's a guy that always, you give him the ball, he's going to get you a little something. It's not that hit the line, fall down, gain a half yard, and try again. He's going to get you a little bit of extra yardage there, so you always appreciate that. But let's talk about the new coach, Elijah Brooks. Yeah, he's got a track record of getting good production from his position group. And we already talked a little bit about this. Which backs are poised to see the biggest benefit from having Brooks in the room?
It's tough because I think all of them, to be honest, but I think a lot of the young guys. I think if you can give them a better base early, where they can get off to the right foot, and I wouldn't expect them to maybe contribute right away. But I do think if you can start to build that foundation from the minute they step on campus to the point where, Tootin and Thomas eventually are going to be gone.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be up to this kind of core of young guys in this room. I think they've all got some talent. I'm curious to see if they can kind of take those next steps and even challenge the guys at the top, to Thomas, for those spots.
Nice.
Definitely.
Yeah, and that's what you want. You always want the competition, but for so long we had way too many running backs, and now we're getting at that perfect level of having the right amount, having some experience, having some youth, obviously potentially more guys to come in this recruiting cycle. And like you said, David, looking at Brooks' track record and then setting a foundation of if you come play for me, you will get production. And if you're selling that and Tootin, and the hope is this year, Tootin and Thomas, we can only hope go Suggs and Jones. I mean, that would be perfect. But, just a good combination. I want to go to the wideout room next, though, because you said it earlier and you knew we were going to get to it. That room was overhauled. I mean, completely overhauled. Tons of recruit coming in, 2 already on campus. Which 5 wide receivers, and I did not do the 3 where it would be difficult for you. I did 5. Who are you seeing getting the most run first? And then with those guys, who are you noticing line up at the X, the Y, and the slot?
Well, it's tough because wide receiver is kind of the one position that we haven't really gotten a good look at. And I hate to say that, but that's one of those things where Fontel Mines, I mentioned earlier, Ollie Jennings and Jalen Lane and Daquan Felton are still trying to figure out the reps. And Fontel Mines does this thing where the new guys start at the bottom and have to work their way up. I tell you, 2 guys that have stood out to me are Gosnell and Holloway. Tucker Holloway and Steven Gosnell have looked pretty good. Gosnell especially. He's trimmed a lot of weight. He looks quicker. He looks leaner. He overall looks better. I think Holloway's look really good. But besides that, we haven't really gotten to see a lot of that stuff. A lot of it just comes against air. A lot of their reps. You can't really tell much against air. Everybody looks good against air. I'm sure all of us would. So I think it's
my knees would buckle.
I feel like
my knees would be buckling right now.
Air, man. Yeah, but I feel like it's just tough. I think we'll see more from some of the young guys, or some of the new guys, I should say. I think Felton and Lane and Jennings will. Once we see them maybe in the spring game, we'll get a good glimpse of, okay, these are the guys who are really showing out and are really coming along the way. I think Gosnell and Holloway have done a really good job in terms of setting themselves up for success this year. And as far as a young guy is concerned, I've been impressed with Aiden Green from the few glimpses I've gotten to see of him. It seems like he's really quick, got some good hands. I'm trying to remember. I don't remember how many freshman wide receivers are on campus. I don't think it can be many. But I do think that whole room has been overhauled, and there are a lot more talented guys. I mean, you just look at the 3 transfers: Jennings, Felton, and Lane. Those 3 transfers, that's more depth than Virginia Tech really had all last year in the wide receiver room. So I'm curious to see. We haven't really gotten a good chance to see how those guys fit in with everybody else yet, but I think the spring game will be a really, really good opportunity to see, okay, here's how this receiver can get separation against this guy. Or, oh, hey, this is kind of a lineup. Oh, hey, Jalen Lane lines up in the slot. That makes a lot of sense. Stuff like that.
Well, a couple of things that you said that I thought were really, really interesting because, of course, that's why you're on BCP and you're our boy and you're giving us some jewels that I don't think nobody even knew. You said Mines, when he brings wide receivers in, he likes to let them fight from the bottom. Hey, we may be doing that in the quarterback room. I don't know. Y'all been going crazy on Twitter. We might be coming in fighting from the bottom in the quarterback room. But anyway, that's not what I wanted to pivot to. You also said Aiden Green's name. We had Matei on here a couple of weeks ago, and he mentioned that name as well. So I know you said, I think you said you like his hands. He's got really good hands. I'll just ask, with you seeing him in person, do you think that he has the body size to play right now if we needed him to play, because I thought he was a little bit more slender.
Before I say something, let me look up his height and weight on the Virginia Tech depth chart, so I know for sure what I'm talking about. We're talking about Aiden Green. He is 26, 6'2", 170. He's got the height. I think he's a little. I'm trying to picture him. He had a really good catch the other day. Now, again, a lot of these catches are coming against air, but I was impressed with just his body and the way it's set up. Like, he put himself in a good position.
Right.
I think he's learning. I think if he continues to get in the weight room over the summer, I think he probably has a pretty good chance to be in the rotation. That would be my perspective of it. Next time we get a chance to talk to Fontel Mines, I think that's one of the guys I'm curious to ask him about, how he's coming along. Because it seems like he's taken some pretty big strides. And, of course, he was I don't know if he was a big-time recruit, but he's somebody that that Tech went to, I believe Tennessee, right? Yeah, Knoxville. He's a Knoxville kid. Tech had to go to Tennessee to get him, right? So
he was committed to I think Cincinnati. For a while.
Yeah. So he's impressed me so far. I think he could probably put a little bit more weight on, but I think his hands, his quickness, I think that's stood out to me as far as he's been pretty good in those areas so far.
Let me ask about one more before we move on to tight ends. I'm curious to see what you think of Xavier Bradshaw at this point in spring practice.
I think he's put on a little bit more weight, which I think is good considering he was very, very
150,
very
155 last year when they poured it on roster.
Yeah, I think he's looked better. I think putting on weight certainly helped. It's tough because, again, a lot of the wide receivers it's kind of all over the place. I think they're still trying to figure out the rotation. I think we'll know more when we watch the spring game. Green just kind of stood out to me because he's one of those few young guys that are currently in that room, guys with no experience really at the college level. I saw him catch a pass the other day, and I looked up my roster, and I was like, "Oh man, that's Aiden Green. Okay, that was a pretty good catch. I'm impressed." Turner Bradshaw, I think he's been okay. I think he's continuing to grow. I think that's important, right? Coaches always say most important time is between your freshman and your sophomore years. That's where you make the biggest growth. So I'm curious to see if he can continue to get in the weight room and get bigger. But I think he's taken some strides. I think the wide receiver room is. I think that group, there might be an odd man out or two in terms of portaling. We'll see what happens when the depth chart is set, if that's what you want to call it.
Yeah.
After the spring game, I think we might see a guy or two kind of leave that room because, again, there are a whole lot of scholarship guys in that room. But like guys like DeJuan Lofton, a guy who's been around for a while, right? Christian Moss, two guys, and those are just two examples I'm giving you guys. They're guys who have been around for a while. I don't want to say they haven't stood out, but I think Gosnell and Holloway have both both put on a good impression this year. I'm curious to see if Lofton and Moss, if they can continue to develop, or if they're going to get passed over by some of those younger guys, right? I don't know what Fontel Mines thinks about those guys right now. We haven't talked to him in a while. But that's definitely – the wide receiver room is definitely one of the big things I'm keeping an eye on. Come the spring game and once we get into August, just to see how that all shakes out. Because, to be honest, that's one of the reasons why Tech struggled last year offensively, right? I mean, it was Caleb Smith and everybody else. And you need more guys to kind of step up. And so far, I like what I've seen from Gosnell and Holloway. And I know he's young, but if Aiden Green can continue to trend in the right direction, I think that's good. And then you've got that core of those three transfers that I think can all come in and make a big impact.
Yeah, and Caleb was definitely more of a straight line guy. I feel like we didn't have a whole lot of separation laterally through those like mid-range routes last year. Hopefully some of these guys can kind of step into that type of role. Let's pivot over to tight ends here. Based on your observations so far.
This is a Stan question. This is a Stan question, by the way, from Brian.
How many different packages do we have that you've seen so far where we've got Gallo and Wright on the field at the same time? And are there any packages where you think we would take Wright off the field fully? I guess Wright and Gallo off the field fully at any point.
God, I'm trying to think. I guess it's more of a spring game question. We haven't really gotten to see a lot of them run full stuff. We did get to see some blocking stuff.
Okay.
Must have been 2 weeks ago when I was here last with Brent Davis. And a lot of it, there were a couple things with Gallo and Wright working together. And there were a couple things with one tight end here, one tight end there. I do think it's important to know that Wright was a little bit nicked up. He was dealing with an injury he's been dealing with injury. He was doing some solo stuff when we watched practice on Tuesday. So he hasn't been a complete go. But we honestly,
I knew he wasn't a full go Tuesday. I think
we honestly though haven't had a chance to really see a whole lot of the stuff they're doing. But from what I can tell, the few things I could tell, seems like they're trying to get both of them involved at the same time. I think it'll kind of be a mix and match thing. I think Gallo's probably a better blocker. I think Wright's probably a better receiver. That would be my opinion. That's what I'd have to guess. But I think if you can get both of them on the field at the same time, that could be a pretty big weapon you guys can use.
And then speaking of that, you just brought up blocking. Like, we know Gallo's a pretty good blocker. Besides Gallo, do we have any other tight ends that's been standing out blocking that you've seen?
I tell you, I think I was going to say Stephen Gosnell, but Benji Gosnell. I've been impressed with Benji Gosnell. Obviously he had a big injury, but I think both in terms of blocking and receiving, he's come up and he's continued to improve, which kind of says a lot about mental toughness and the way that he's able to kind of fight through those injuries. I think he's looked pretty good at blocking. I think Wright's gotten better from what I've noticed. Besides that, that's kind of been the top three guys, right? It's been Gallo, Wright, kind of A1A, 1B. And then I think Benji Gosnell has kind of been that guy right behind him. And I think all three of those guys are probably guys that they feel comfortable with in terms of blocking. And I think that's been a big part of it. Again, I think that's one of those things where we'll know more with the spring game once we see those guys in action in terms of them getting off the edge and actually having to put somebody on their butt, right? Once they have an opportunity to do that, it's a little bit different when you're blocking a guy with a big giant pad in practice. So, right. But I liked what I've seen so far.
Yeah, absolutely. And my buddy Robbie here talks about Benji having a ton of talent. I mean, Benji was a legitimate 4-star.
Yeah.
Before his injuries and everything. So Benji was recruited by a lot of different schools, and with his size, like 6'5", 240, straight out of the gate, that doesn't shock me that you say that he's that next guy. And I think just from a perspective of us as fans, if you tell me after Gallo graduates this year, it's Benji Gosnell and Daquan Wright are 1-2 tight end room, that can be sick.
Yeah,
because of how athletic those guys and how nasty they can be.
Yeah, and I like that because, I always like to see a good balance of tight end talent. So if you're telling me Benji's coming along, he's going to kind of be your more balanced guy that can block, guy that can be a threat in the receiving game. Daquan, more the heavy carrying in the receiving game by itself. And then obviously Gallo can kind of work there a little bit more in the inline situation. So if we can kind of mix and match those and make that work, I like that. But let's move over to the defensive line. Looking at the returning production and depth at defensive end, is it time to worry about this unit in 2023, or have you seen guys kind of take that next step so far this offseason?
I tell you what, that's one of the spots I'm worried about, the defensive end depth. Mostly because a lot of it's young and experienced guys that they've never had to be the starter, right? I think Cole Nelson, C.J. McCray, Jordan McDonald, whichever McDonald twin is.
Jordan sounds right.
Yes, Jordan. I think a lot of those guys they've got good talent. I just think a lot of them never had to be that defensive end before, that starter, the one that has to play snap after snap after snap. That's what I worry about. I think maybe a little bit. I think there could be more depth there. I think that's one of the big problems that J.C. Price obviously brought in multiple guys at tackle in the last class. Didn't really bring in any guys in this year's class, and Finlayer, the freshman, Ishmael from Canada, I believe, he had his arm in a sling the other day at practice. He had an injury, so that's a spot where I'm not worried. I'm a little bit questioning, concerned. Maybe I think you could use. I'm curious to see how that plays out, and if those guys have taken the next step, right? We know how good the tackles are. We know how experienced they are. Can Cole Nelson and CJ McRae and Jordan McDonald and those guys on the edge take the next step? Because if they can, it's going to be a long season on the defensive line. But there's not a whole lot behind them necessarily. And I think that's kind of a problem a little bit. I will say, Keyshawn Burgos, I think, is a guy who he's got more reps with the twos, and I think he could have a solid role. But I did think it was interesting the other day. Jordan McDonald was taking the two snaps at right end, and then with the threes, he moved over to left end, which kind of tells you that there are really only 4 or 5 guys that they're comfortable with. So, and again, but here's the thing. Maybe one of those guys, Cole Nelson, CJ McRae, come out and have a fantastic year, right? We don't know. But I think they lack that one true veteran who's been there before and done it. I should add that Feldarius Payne, and he's kind of going to be a hybrid guy a little bit. He's still dealing with an injury too. And then they get James Jeanette in, which I think is important, which I think adds a little bit more depth. But right now, there's not really that experienced guy.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely when you look at it, you don't have a guy that you can just point to and say, that guy is going to make you a play when you need it. Because, we saw last year there was, up and down performances, even for a guy that was experienced like Tywon Garbett. And, I just think that if we can find someone that can be that playmaker, that guy that can get to the quarterback this year, because that's something we've kind of really haven't had in a couple of years now. So I'd like to see maybe one of those guys come on and be able to take over that role.
Definitely. And looking at the defensive tackle position, we know we have a little bit more size and a little bit more, veteran presence there. When you look at, Fuga and Kendricks and Pollard, thank God they came back. But have you seen anybody pushing to get into the 2 deep behind those guys that we kind of know we're going to see? And again, like we talked about, I think they're sliding Payne. I think they're sliding Payne down inside as well. So we got some things going there, but have you seen anybody pushing to try to get in that 2 deep?
Yeah, well, I think Wilfred Panay was the guy there last year.
Yeah.
I've been impressed with Malachi Madison, and I think he's kind of pushed that envelope a little bit. I think he could make a really good case to be that 4th guy. I think Lamar Law and Gunnar Givens aren't necessarily that far behind.
Right.
Now, I'm not saying I would expect them to play, but I think those are the next 2 guys that are kind of pushing that group. There's certainly much more depth at tackle than there is at end. I'll say that.
Right.
But I think Malachi Madison could be that 4th guy. I legitimately think that. I think he's come a long way. And J.C. Price is kind of – I haven't talked to JC in a while, but he's a guy I think that JC is pretty high on that has a lot of potential if he can continue to trend in the right direction. And I think he's a guy that can give Panay a run for his money for that 4th spot.
Well, sorry, David. David's like tempering my expectations. Like, whoa.
Yeah,
but what we said earlier, though, it's the freshman to sophomore years is where you want to see guys take the steps. And when I hear you say Malachi Madison, we saw him last year. He is a big-bodied guy. We know Lamar Law is a big-bodied guy. Gunnar has the body. And Tally's been preaching all along, we've got to get bigger on the trenches. And when you say those guys are looking better, I hear that freshman to sophomore things are clicking. They're pushing more. So, I mean, I get it. I don't expect it. By all means, if they start this year, that's great. But, but the point I get excited about is knowing that when Pollard and when Kendricks are gone next year, it's not just Fuga out there. You've got some young guy pushing for playing time, and these other two are starting to make that steady rise up. And I do really worry about the end, like you mentioned earlier. I think we all do. And I think if you say there's one portal addition this year after spring, it's got to be edge, without a doubt. Now let's flip to the linebacker room, because I think that room does not need any portal guys. I mean, goodness gracious, J.R. Walker, left the program, but it's still loaded all over the place. But the big questions at Mike, like who's going to play there? Is it Tisdale? Is it Keller? Which of the young guys are making the big push for that spot this spring?
Well, Jaden McDonald was working there a couple of weeks ago. That was when Tisdale was out and Walker was still in the program. It's changed a little bit since. Jaden Keller was taking the 1 rep set at Mike the other day. And Pry has been impressed with them. And I think Keller's starting to actually come along. I think before he's had so much potential, right? You've heard everybody rave about him time and time again. I think it's gotten to the point where he's really starting to show that he knows what he's doing and he can kind of digest the information and help people adjust. Brent Pry specifically referred to an instance in practice the other day where Keller noticed that the defensive line was kind of lined up, not incorrectly, so to speak, but they were off a little bit. And he noticed that and corrected them and was able to be in his right spot, right? Pry was kind of concerned with him just being able to get down Will, and he's been able to kind of get down Will and Mike a little bit. So I think Keller might be the guy at Mike as far as young guys are concerned. Obviously, Tisdale's still there, and he missed practice the one I was at a couple weeks ago. And then, of course, I was gone, and now Tisdale's back as I'm back. I think he was at practice last week as well. But I think it could be the Keller-Tisdale punch at 1-2 in no specific order. But I think Keller's coming along a long way, which bodes well because they've got a good Will. They've got a good Sam, right? They've got Kelly Lawson and Keontae Jenkins. Those are 2 talented guys. Yeah. If you can figure out the Mike, you're in good shape.
Yeah. Speaking of that, so you talked about Lawson, you talked about the other positions there. It's Sam and Will. What is the most intriguing 3-man combo that you've seen at practice so far?
I think it's got to be the Jenkins, Keller, Lawson, because those guys fly around the field and they're fun to watch. I mean, we all saw what Lawson did last year towards the end of the year. Just his length and his defensive presence. But Keontae Jenkins, I think, had a really, I don't want to say quiet year maybe, but he kind of had a quiet, really good year last year. And I think if Keller can continue to get it down, I think those 3 can be really formidable. And that's not just, this year's group, but that's a couple years down the line, right? I'm trying to think. Keontae Jenkins, I believe, has maybe 1 more year. I don't have it up in front of me, but I do think that Lawson and Keller are your guys, and I think they kind of fly around the field. They're very young. They've got the energy. They've got the ability to kind of cover all this ground, them and Jenkins. I think that's going to be really intriguing if it plays out that way. I think that's going to be a really intriguing trio.
Definitely. He is a legend. He is the man.
And Jenkins is a senior this year, so he was there during COVID. So he came in 2020. So he has a COVID year left, David. So Jenkins technically has 2 years left. So, I mean, let's get him more excited. What you got, Tally?
Listening to him talk about just the people that we have that could fill into these spots is intriguing and exciting because I just keep hearing length. You know what I'm saying? You've got people that, of course, athleticism too. Kelly Lawson is a much different type player than someone like a Dax Hollifield. No disrespect to Dax. I think Dax did what he was supposed to do really well. But when you have an athlete that you can put at linebacker, you're able to do some different things, and I think that that's going to be fun to watch. Another question that I guess I'll have for you, David, is just name one player in this linebacker unit that maybe a lot of folks in Virginia Tech Twitter, Virginia Tech fan base don't know, that is just not on our radar, that could crack this two deep going into the fall.
Well, I think there are a lot of young guys coming in, right? Over the summer. You got Asen Stevens, Devorian Copeland, Caleb Woodson, who you guys mentioned earlier. Don't forget about Stone Snyder, the VMI transfer, right? I don't know what his immediate impact is going to be. But I think going into the fall, there is going to be a hole with those four guys I mentioned. The linebacker room is going to be a pretty deep room, in my opinion. I think there's going to be a lot of talent there. And here's the other thing, right? Snyder obviously, is an older guy who's only going to be here for a year. Tisdale's not after this year. Jenkins has one more year left. Everybody else has multiple years of eligibility left. This is a linebacker room for the future, right? I know that didn't exactly answer your question, but I think I'm curious to see how those three freshmen, when they get here, when they get to campus, where do they kind of fall in line? And I think McDonald is another guy I'm very curious to watch. It's going to be hard for him, I think, to get number one reps potentially, just because of the other talent in the room. But I do think, he's come a long way, and he and his brother, obviously, they're really hard-working guys, and I think they could both play potentially big roles. So this is a linebacker room, I think, for the future for Virginia Tech.
Yeah, the McDonald's seemed like they picked up the defense really quick, and that helped them get kind of on that field pretty quickly. And obviously, there are other talented guys around them, and some of that's starting to kind of rise to the top. So, that definitely explains that for sure. I'm interested to see what Stone can do as well, just because, we know the numbers that he put up elsewhere. So can that translate? And if that does translate, does that add just another layer to that mic battle, once fall practice starts?
And everybody who doesn't know, our buddy Robbie that is usually on the show with us and is in the comments, he's one of our coaches that's close to the program. He got some airtime the other day on the promo film of the coaches. So Robbie, it was good to see you on there, but he does give us a lot of insight on what he sees at practices and players that he sees in the area. So he's not just somebody that's on here bullshitting. He knows his stuff, and he's seen a lot of football. But
and he got players with rings.
Yeah,
he got players with rings.
And if you look at Robbie looks like a football coach. I don't know if I want to catch Robbie in a dark alley by himself. But switching gears a little bit, David, talking about one of our hopeful stars, Dorian Strong. He was kept out a lot last year due to an injury. How has he looked coming back from that injury?
He's looked like himself. He's looked like he's a more energized version, man. I tell you what, Dorian is one of my favorite players to cover on this team, simply because he's always got a smile on his face. He's always joking around, maybe a little bit too much, but he's a very energetic guy, awesome guy. And we talked to him a couple of weeks ago, and he kind of told us that it was tough for him at times. He had to lean on some of his family. Just mentally, it was tough, right? His season, he essentially knew his season was over, but he didn't think that at first, right? He thought he was going to be able to come back and play. And the doctors told him he had to have surgery. And he was like, he went from kind of being like, okay, I can't wait to get back, to, man, I'm not going to be able to get back. And he spent a lot of time watching film on himself of what he could do better. And he looks like I don't want to say he looks like himself, but he looks brand new. I mean, he is energized and he's ready to go. And he's looked really good. I will say he's still kind of trying, I think, get back to 100%. Like, I think he's looking pretty well so far, but I think I wouldn't say 100%. He's done some one-on-one stuff alone off to the side, a couple, one or two practices that I've seen. But I think he's come a long way. And Mansour Delane, you pair him and Dorian Strong together, man, and Derek Canteen, somebody that the coaching staff has raved about this year. That is a really good starting DB room, man. I'm really excited to see what Dorian does. I think he's got a little bit of a chip on his shoulder, right?
Yeah.
You gotta have a chip wearing 44, man.
Can we get him into a single digit?
I'll take a 20 number. I'll take 29 anytime. 44 is next. Keep going.
He had such a great year, right? And he had so much promise last year. I think he was kind of just bummed. He's got a little bit of fire in him, Now he feels like himself again. He's playing football, and I think that's the important thing.
And that's the thing. He is a good football player. And you mentioned, David, about the starters. I mean, Strong, Delane, and Canteen. That's a hell of a front three. It's a hell of a three across the board, and guys you feel comfortable probably putting in multiple situations. But who's becoming 4 and 5? Because football is a game of attrition, rotation. I mean, I look at the roster here. You see Devin Alves, the big-bodied guy out of Florida. Cam Johnson got some run last year. Who do you see going in there? Because obviously during practice they're rotating them. Who are you seeing more of with the Cheetahs out there?
The 2s and the 3s the other day. It's Cam Johnson, Antonio Cotman Jr., who's of course an early enrollee.
Okay.
I don't believe he was in practice the other day, but he was a couple weeks ago when I saw him. He was repping with the 2s. So, and Elijah Howard. I think those are some of the guys that are coming along in that room. Again, I'm curious. Here's what you got to remember, right? You mentioned cheetahs. There are a whole lot of cheetahs coming in over the summer, right?
Yes,
Allie mentioned Braylon Johnson earlier. There are a ton of freshmen coming in. I think that room is only going to get more competitive as this year goes on.
I agree. Again, going back to what we're talking about earlier when we talked about just recruiting and going out and getting people. This staff has brought in some people that are, when you talk about a freshman enrolling early and getting any kind of run with 1s, 2s, 3s, it is tough to come from high school to college because anybody who's played, if you went from pee-wee to middle school and middle school to high school, you always run into a speed difference. The speed of the game is so fast when you go to different levels. And when you pull in somebody like a Cotman that, a lot of people said, oh, well, he's not this or he's that. If you look at him, he looks like he can go play. His body looks like he can go play on a college field. And with what Cunningham is telling us, I mean, he's picking up the speed of the game pretty good. So, again, we know it's spring ball, but it's definitely good to hear when we have young guys that are able to step in and make a difference because we need it. We definitely need that.
Yeah, it definitely seeing that room kind of level up from guys that were experienced but maybe not quite as talented as you'd like to see, and now you're seeing the level of play get ratcheted up a little bit. So that's nice to see as well. Let's talk about the safeties a little bit. We got a lot of certainty at the starting spot with Nasir Peoples and Jalen Stroman. Not a ton of proven depth behind them, though. Will the 2 deep consist of some heretofore underutilized veterans, or will there be a youth movement in that rotation?
We're talking about safeties?
Yeah. Behind the people,
I tell you what,
Stroman guys.
Jalen Jones and Mose Phillips, I think they're picking up stuff really quickly.
Okay.
Mose Phillips, first of all, is a heat-seeking missile. God, who was it that we chatted with the other day that admitted that to us? There was one of the safeties we chatted with, and I wrote it down. I asked him, I was like, is he like a heat-seeking missile out there? He was like, oh, yeah. And we talked to Pearson Prelude the other day, too. We talked to Jalen Stroman. And Stroman was like, yeah, Mose Phillips like heat-seeking missile. I think he and Jalen Jones have picked up on stuff really, really well. 2 guys who are kind of both new to that position in terms of one transfer from, moved over from wide receiver. The other is in his first semester. But I think those are two guys that have a lot of potential. And like you mentioned, Tally, they are attuned to the speed of the game, right? They've picked up and adjusted to the speed of the game. It's not really that slow for them, or it's not really that fast for them, right? They can keep up and they understand it. I'm curious to see how those guys kind of get better and improve and become even more of a guys that Tech can rely on when we get closer to the August, because I think they both got really good potential. I think Mose Phillips, the fact that Mose Phillips is already on campus and he's essentially repping with the twos, and that's amazing.
That's
he and those DBs that those guys are recruiting, they're smart, they're talented, they handle themselves very, very well. So I think Jones and Phillips are two guys that it would not shock me for them to be in the 2 deep come the fall.
And when you talk about these young players and somebody like a Mose Phillips, and you say he's a heat-seeking missile, for guys who don't know a lot about football or don't just tune in to Saturday's games, you got to build depth. You got to have special teams players. So who doesn't want a 6'2" heat-seeking missile going down on kickoff team and going and tracking the ball? So this may be sometimes you don't see these guys get a lot of playing time in the 1 or 2 deep, but if they're able to contribute in that special teams room and keep some of the ones off the field so we're not getting hurt on special teams, that's a big deal. So that's definitely good to hear.
Well, talking about Jones too, when I looked at him,
you said it. You said it. I was going to say it. What you've always talked about, Jalen Jones and the way he plays, man.
Jones reminds me of a lot of not necessarily ability wise, but the way he ran with the ball, playing wide receiver. Anquan Bolden, he ran physical, he ran hard, and I feel like that's going to translate to special teams, like Tally was just talking about. And obviously to, backing up, one of those safeties on the other side where he can use that physicality and that size to his advantage.
I think the coaches should have a video segment of Divine Diablo and show Jalen Jones every chance they get.
There you go.
I stand there the same exact player, but maybe kind of the same path. Hey, he's in the league. So you can say whatever you want about him. I don't think nobody's going to say anything bad, but that's who I'd be showing. That's who I'd be showing Jalen Jones videos of.
Yep, 100%. And it's good to hear that they're out there and they're pushing already. It's the speed of the game. For Jalen, it makes sense, right? Jalen's played. Jalen's been involved on the field for so long. But to hear someone like Mose Phillips come in immediately and start, picking up and is likely going to be that 2 deep guy, it goes to what Thomas is saying here. You're starting to build rooms where they're so deep where it's, Phillips, you've got Stroman, who's a young guy. Phillips and Jones are younger guys where it's going to take a while. But when it takes a while, you're developing them. They're ready to go physically and speed-wise when they get there. Now, you mentioned coaches, and we do have some things to ask you about the coaches. You've had a chance to see Tyler Bowen and Stu Holt in their new roles. I mean, Stu Holt is not really a new role. He's coached tight ends half his career. But for Tyler Bowen, it's really the first time in that quarterback room. And I know it's at a distance, but how are they looking so far? Let's start with Tyler because to me, that's the one everybody wants to know about.
Yeah, I think they're both fine. I think Bowen being closer to the quarterbacks has been a benefit, right? He's hands-on with the quarterbacks all the time. And, of course, that's the battle everybody wants to know more about, Drones and Wells, right? He's more hands-on with those guys than anybody. From everything I can tell, that's playing out really well so far. And you mentioned Holt. I think Holt has been fine. I think the tight end room is kind of a lot more known than unknown, right? I'm sure that transition wasn't too complicated for him. And it seems like everything in that room is going well so far. But I think Bowen is the one that everybody's curious about. And from everything I can tell, he's transitioned really, really well. And everybody in the room is taken to that transition well, which is very important.
Yeah, if you've got the buy-in from the players, I think that's the most important thing. Because if you don't have that, then you're kind of fighting a losing battle, and it's hard to get back above water. Let's talk about this. This is a little more fun question. Kind of give you a chance to, pull something out of left field here. Is there any coach who stands out to you for kind of how they operate during practice or anything like that?
Derek Jones is awesome, man. He's constantly challenging his guys. I think it's tough because some of the coaches work in certain areas where it's like certain areas of the field where it's hard to kind of hear everything they're saying. But I enjoy listening to Sean Quinn, but I also enjoy listening to Derek Jones. Derek Jones is constantly challenging his guys to get better and be better. That's what you expect from a coach. I'll say this: I think all the coaches are great people and they're great guys, and he's done a really good job. Brent Pry has done a really good job, I should say, of hiring good people and guys who have good personalities and are fitting in well. I'm curious to see how the product on the football field turns out. But I think when you wander around in practice and you're listening to all these guys, they're fired up. They're ready to go. Derek Jones is, you could say in a way, talking some shit to like some of the players, right? He's challenging them, right? He's saying, "Hey, man, don't be dumb. Like get your act together." Right. And that's how you continue to build their character, but continue to help them grow as both players and actual, humans. And, so I've enjoyed watching Derek Jones. I think he's one, pretty funny, and two, he's real, right? He's real with his guys. I think a lot of the other coaches are too. I think Fontel Mines is a great guy. Yeah, of course. I missed a week or two covering women's basketball, so I didn't get to be around practice as much as I would like. But I do think for the most part, I've enjoyed being around all the staff because they're nice people and they really challenge their guys to be the best version of themselves.
Yep, and then I guess talking kind of, since you brought up just different personnel groups and different coaches in their groups, talking personnel. What groups do you think are the most fluid from like practice to practice in terms of either like starting personnel or just personal groupings?
I think it's wide receiver. I mean, I told you guys earlier, Fontel Mines is kind of mixing and matching. Fontel Mines is kind of mixing and matching, right? I think Gosnell and Holloway have both kind of taken the responsibility of they're the guys who are leading the group, but I think it's kind of mixing and matching with some of the young guys. I'm very curious in the spring game when we see some of those young guys in that uniform for the first time, how they look, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Can they get separation? They're playing against some pretty good DBs for the most part on the other side. But I think wide receiver is one of those rooms where there are so many scholarship guys, right? Trying to balance all the reps and figure out what guys are where each day. I think that's probably the group that's most fluid.
I understand. And so some people's probably going to lose their minds one way or the other, during the spring game. Hey, reel it in. It's going to be all right. I'm going to be David's bodyguard. I'm going to be hanging out with them. So y'all just let me know if y'all got any questions. Y'all come through me. And then
I love this, but before I ask my next question, I do need to make a quick thing here for Tally and just so y'all know where that game certainly stands. I needed to update y'all because I know y'all.
I knew how this game was gonna go before it was even played. I knew it.
David, I podcast with two Lakers fans here. The chat, our text sometimes is this Lakers talk, and I just look down like, oh man, I gotta deal with this. But here's my next question: who have you seen merge into the a leadership role that maybe you weren't expecting this offseason?
I think the big one is Derek Canteen. I think he's coming immediately and taking a leadership role. He's a guy who was a freshman All-American pretty much at Georgia Southern, right? And then dealt with some injuries, and he has some up and downs. He's come in. First of all, he's phenomenally well-spoken. He's a great guy to be around. We had a chance to speak with him, and he was awesome. He's a guy who the other guys have really looked up to. And for guys like Dorian Strong and Mansour Delane, they challenge, his presence has challenged them to be better. I think he's made that whole room a whole lot better. And I think he's the big one. He's come in and he's basically, he's a transfer. Yeah, he's in a new environment, but he's taken up a leadership role and he's challenging everybody to be better versions of themselves. And that's important. That's what you need in this program to get to that next level.
Yeah, and I think we had a whole episode where we talked about who are the new leaders going to be. So it's nice to kind of get a leadership role from maybe that guy that you're not expecting, and I think Canteen falls into that category because I don't think any of us necessarily drew a circle around Canteen and said he's going to be a guy that's going to really kind of drive the DB room or anything like that. So having a guy like that step up, that just makes everybody else below him stronger. So that's important. Let's talk about this though, because we're looking at spring practice, we're looking at depth. You specifically have talked about the wide receiver room. We're kind of right at about 8 scholarships over the limit right now. What position groups do you think will have the most portal attrition post spring? And are there any groups where we can afford to add another player or two if things open up?
I think you can always add offensive linemen or defensive linemen. I think that you can never go wrong with adding more guys. I think the linebacker room is fine. I think the DB room is fine for the most part, though. It wouldn't surprise me if there maybe was one guy who left that room. They like keeping that room tight. But I think that's at a good number. I think most of the attrition's on the offensive side of the ball. 6 quarterbacks is too many. It's just plain too many. And wide receiver, you do not need 14 scholarship wide receivers. I'm sorry. That's just the way it goes. So everywhere else I think is all right. I think you would love to add some offensive linemen or defensive linemen if you can, but I think quarterback and wide receiver are really the two where I'm like, there are too many people in this room. There are 20 guys between quarterback and wide receiver, and there are maybe 3-4 guys on the field at one time between those two positions. You don't need 20 guys between those two positions. So I think that's where all the attrition is really going to come from.
I agree.
Yep, and it'll be interesting to see who goes and who stays as we get in the fall. And I think having you, David, on with us tonight, with all the points you've been making, even though you've been on the road for for close to almost 2 weeks, and still having your insight, man. We really appreciate it. We appreciate you joining us again. We're going to probably have you back as we get closer to the first game of the season. So mark your calendar, even though we know you're going to be in Blacksburg, really right there at it. But, Tally, Brian, anything else y'all want to add? Anything breaking over the last 2 hours?
My Lakers spirit. Other than that, I think.
All right, boys.
I guess the main thing for Cunningham, you got anything planned for the spring game? Any fun festivities or tailgates I need to attend?
Man, I'm a working man. I'm not tailgating. Who do you think I am, man? It's actually my sister's birthday that weekend. She's a junior at Tech, so I'm going to be spending some time with her. I got some family coming into town. I guess that's what happens when your brother and sister go to school here. But so I'm gonna spend some time with some family, and I'll be working a lot. But no, I'm excited. I think it'll be a good weekend, especially since I've been gone all over the place. It'll be nice to have a lot of people. I don't know if it'll be nice to have a lot of people in Blacksburg, but it'll be cool to see a whole lot of people. I'm sure I'll cross paths with you guys, assuming you guys are there, and a whole lot of other people. But yeah, I think this is it's a big weekend, right? Big other sporting events at home. You've got obviously a 3.2 for 32. I'm curious to see how the spring game plays out. I don't know how much we're actually going to, be able to take away from it, but I do think this is an opportunity for a lot of these guys to showcase a little bit what they have. I mean, we came away from the spring game last year and said, man, Caleb Smith is good. Well, that was the only wide receiver who could do anything last year. What we came away from last year saying, man, this offensive line is a mess. Now, to be fair, they did split it up, but
It was a mess.
how does that stuff look, right? We'll come away with probably a couple big takeaways, and those will be our talking points going forward. So, hope you guys get a chance to come into town and view it. I'm sure you guys are, and can't wait to see you all. I'm sure we'll all cross paths sometime soon.
Absolutely. Again, David Cunningham from Tech Sideline. If y'all do not know, Tech Sideline's running a great special right now. $120 for the entire year of all of their in-depth coverage. David, you always write great, man. You always do us right by coming on here. So thank you for coming. That does wrap up this episode of the Boundary Corner podcast, brought to you by Main Street Pharmacy in Blacksburg, Wilson, with our guest, David Cunningham. I'm Curtis Wilson.
I'm Brian Siegler.
Jonathan Talley.
Visit our website, boundarycornerbt.com, to listen to all of our episodes. Brian, you're going to need to stand up here in a moment. And also visit our newly launched merchandise shop. Show the logo, Boundary Corner Store. You got to get up and you got to turn around. I'm sorry, I got to model you here. You got to turn around, man. You got to turn your back. So where you can get, there you go. And if you don't know, for all of the Virginia Tech fans, if you don't know what that means, you need to come over here one night with me, Tally. David will join you, and we will educate on you what "we swarm baby" means. Because if you don't know, you have not been a fan long enough, and we will educate you. All right. While you're there, follow us, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, subscribe on our YouTube channel, where a lot of people were watching tonight. We really appreciate you guys out there and chatting with us. Podcast Source, Spotify, Amazon, Apple Podcasts, all of them. As always, we let our buddy Jason Long play us in, play us out. And Brian, he's got dates. He's got back. Dates. He's out of hibernation.
He's out of the dungeon recording the new hits.
The new hits, yes, it will be. Going to be at the Grandin Village Farmers Market down in Roanoke, actually on the spring game. Going to be there from 8 to noon. And then in June, Harmony for Hope, supporting a lymphoma research foundation at Mango's Bar and Grill. So check him out at jasonlongmusic.com, where you can link to all his music, Apple, Spotify, and on his YouTube and Facebook pages. For 2 hours and 8 minutes and 30 seconds, we thank you all for listening. And as always, let's go.
Hokies.